This is kind of nuts, but it's unfortunately true. There's an increasing trend of people to use ChatGPT. And again, for the reminder of the day, if I say AI, I mean it in the most widest and general sense. Okay. I'm not a data scientist, I'm a marketer, so I can do this. And what we see now and what's happening now, and it's quite evident the last, couple of weeks and months, is that more and more consumers seek inspiration on Instagram or TikTok. So on two very visual, on two very fast-paced, and on two very algorithmically curated content platforms, right? And the number hovers somewhere between 16 and 75% of inspiration seeking on these two platforms, which is pretty much dominance, right? But now it becomes more interesting. There's an increasing flood of consumers that then goes to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is pretty much synonymous for many users as in an AI tool because it's the most widely known, I would say, and asks ChatGPT to help them plan their holiday, including potential hotels and flights and car rentals and everything that might be needed for that very holiday. Now, this might sound like a great thing to do, and maybe it's convenient for the consumer. I personally haven't tried it yet, so I can't really tell. But it comes with severe implications on a behavioral perspective, but also from a targeting perspective and from a marketing process perspective. Let's think about this for a second. And again, this is super current, right? This is so new; it's almost not happening yet. If you relate this to our discussion that we had about platforms in session 2, and we said, hey, platforms, they have emerged through the scaling of demand, right? That was sort of like their key feature, their fuel. They scaled the demand and they attracted the two-sided players to the platform. They grew into dominance and they were almost like unstoppable, right? We mentioned Booking.com as one of the players and said, well, hotel can hardly compete with Booking.com because Booking.com as an aggregator absorbs so much web demand. This is crazy, right? And this is what you see here on the left-hand side of the screen. Traditionally, when I say the new old, this is us 2 months ago, right? We plan to book a holiday. What do? We go on Google. We would then find Booking.com references because they swamped the web, right, with SEM tactics, leading us to Booking.com. This is how they absorb traffic. And then we would find on Booking.com flight and hotel combinations, book it through Booking.com, which lets the platform keep its dominant power form to the hotels that need to be listing through Booking. Otherwise, they lose out on the traffic. But let's look at the new, which is happening right now. I get my inspiration on TikTok or Instagram, and then I go on ChatGPT. Now, here's the big question. If I then go on ChatGPT, does ChatGPT go on Booking.com, which is what we would do? Or does it find the individual sources that we need or that ChatGPT needs for the travel agenda that it puts together? And we find some clues in the current sort of like change in web traffic and impacts on SEO tactics. And these seem to lead towards the notion that there's, more traffic now going to, again, individual providers. That changes the game. This is a disruption now on the almighty two-sided platform business, at least in some categories, that is now getting rattled up because the traffic coming to the platform directly might now see to a certain extent because consumers are not going anymore through the traditional web search, finding the aggregator, and planning and booking a holiday. Isn't it cool? I think at least it's interesting, right? And this is one of the things, what we said yesterday, the day before, that should be acknowledged with your dynamic marketing capabilities to be able to analyze the market, perceive trends and changes, and then discuss within your organization, what does it mean for us? Does this have an impact today or tomorrow on our organization? And what do we have to do to mitigate the risk or to exploit the opportunity, whichever it is, right? There's new terminologies that emerged through this, which is not the discussion of today, but instead of search engine optimization, optimizing for AI agents and so far and so forth, or LLMs, a whole new field emerges, and businesses need to deal with it. Here's a chart from SEMrush, a site that is heavily or well known in the SEO community, analyzing traffic and sort of like changes and the latest and updates in the field of SEO mainly. And it has released at the end of last year clickstream data, again US bound, on how ChatGPT has changed referral traffic or has impacted referral traffic for certain industries. Now, if you look at this, it's of course not a big surprise that you see online services, education, mass media, information technology, distance learning, and publishing sort of like leading the field. Why? Because ChatGPT as a platform is not just used by consumers to find products. Actually, it's not very heavily used to do this yet. And it's not very heavily used yet to find services, but it's heavily used to deal with information. It's kind of like starting to replace your web search, right? In a sense. So people flock to the platform to get information on any given topic. So therefore, of course, the top traffic absorbing categories are yet no surprise. It would be very interesting, and I was looking for data, if we see a change, for example, for travel and tourism between November 2024 and now. After all, it's a couple of months. So we might see a change or a tendency. And if that would go up, that would be an indication for us that there's a behavioral change in how consumers go about booking holidays or in flights or rental cars and that sort of stuff, right? Who knows? At this point, it's a hypothesis. It's an observation, but it's not yet on scale. But this needs now to be observed by us from a point of strategic marketing to then be ingrained into the organization to deal with it, right? The future is iffy, and we never know how iffy works out. All right, so the customer journey evolution. We looked at this before already with our travel agent example, right? The traditional customer journey, there's different models, but this is a very simple and sort of like traditional model of what consumers go through. Awareness, as in that's usually a state of deprivation. The easiest example for this is you're hungry. You know when you're hungry because your stomach is like, growling or whatever, right? And that means you have an interest in curing that state of deprivation, which means you could potentially eat something, right? You would then evaluate the potential options of what you could eat, decide on one food item or food brand, and then go about your thing, eat, and live happily ever after type thing, right? And we for quite a long time assumed that consumers go through the purchasing process or the customer journey in a linear fashion. And of course, I know you're saying now, that's stupid. Of course, it's stupid. It was never true that we go through it in a linear fashion, but a framework or a model has to always simplify the real world, right? Otherwise, it doesn't serve its purpose anymore. And in sort of like the latest acknowledgement that we have, we see more and more that the customer journey is not only changing into new models. There's a framework from McKinsey, the 7S's or something, I believe. We're not looking at this today. We look at Google's messy or fuzzy middle, which I think is an interesting model to capture part of the discussion we've just had and show the back and forth and the messiness of what consumers do in the middle of their journey, which is largely invisible to us, right? That leads to a decision or it doesn't lead to a decision. Likewise, but we have to think, how will the journey change if consumers use something like a ChatGPT? Maybe the messy middle then disappears, right? And we just have awareness and purchase and retention thereafter. Who knows? But it's quite fascinating. We are at the beginning of this, right? I cannot give you an answer. There's no framework that gives you a fundamental answer yet, because this is happening right now. The commercial I just showed you, that aired last night, it was created 3 days ago, right? Will it have the impacts that we assume it will have? We don't know. It's a hypothesis that we currently work with, and now we have to observe what it does over time, right? So here's the Google model I just mentioned, um, the fuzzy middle or the messy middle. And I think this model is really interesting, right? On the beginning, you see triggers. This is again sort of like your awareness point. You feel hungry, or you see an advertising that captures you. A friend of you comes by and says, "Oh, I bought this new cool phone," and you're like, "Oh, show me." This is your trigger. The trigger could, of course, be manifold. It could be any of the triggers that we have today: friends and family, media, surroundings, normative, and so on and so forth. But then the model moves into this messy middle, and this is shown by the consumer going back and forth between exploration and evaluation, right? And Google argues in their paper, and I think it's interesting because already Google has a lot of data. They argue that consumers switch back and forth between these two mental modes of discovering brands or discovering products, discovering services, which we group as solutions, right? What we look for as consumers is a solution to our problem. This is like marketing 101, the very basics of marketing, which of course you guys are far above and beyond, so we're not tackling this anymore. And once we found something, we evaluate what we found, right? And this goes back and forth in like an infinite cycle, if you want, until we get to again a behavioral action, which would then be the purchase or the abandonment. Now, this has really, really, really important impacts on us. First impact, if you think about this, that means consumers actively go through such a messy middle of exploration and evaluation, right? Exploration sometimes, if you think about it, helps us to also clarify our need, which is almost why such a model cannot be linear, because that would assume your need is very clear and very well defined. I can promise you that when you set out to purchase a product or service, in almost every case, your need is not well defined because you never think about your need, right? B2Bs don't think about their need. It gets defined usually through the process, which is quite uncool and sometimes doesn't look very professional, wastes a lot of time and resources, right? But the B2C consumer is definitely helped by going through this process to learning, oh, there's a phone I could buy. Oh, it's interesting. Oh, it looks like a cool phone. Oh, it's super expensive. Maybe I switch to a cheaper model. Could that also take nice pictures? This is the exploration evaluation. And that helps you maybe clarify these needs, right? Now, again, if you think about quite quickly, now imagine you use ChatGPT, because we've seen it before, to support your travel needs, right? And it's increasingly being shown, at least on LinkedIn, people giving examples of how they use it. Now imagine now you have a trigger and you say, "Oh, my phone broke. I need a new one." So you go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, which is the best phone that I could buy based on everything you know about me?" Do we now have a messy middle, or do we go straight to a purchase potentially? Now, of course, you would say it depends on the consumer. Some consumers will go straight to the purchase, right? No more messy middle. Some other consumers would go through an evaluation, re-trigger or re-prompt GPT, or maybe start the parallel search as they would have done traditionally. And I would assume for the next month or years, we might see different journeys making use of different technologies, following the old trail, following the newest of trails, which is just using some sort of AI tool, and or being a hybrid, a mix of the two, right? Until we see a new dominant form to establish itself. But for us, it's important to think about this. What would the implication be? Right? This is the future. This is what we need to prepare our brands for at this very point. And Google also mentioned a few mental biases that impact the messy middle. Most of them, of course, you would know. There's nothing new. For example, category heuristics. These make our life easier. We think quite often in heuristics as consumers. When we think about fast food, you think of McDonald's, right? That's a simplification for us that helps us. The power of the know, which means if you find, for example, two products, one is immediately available and one is available only next week, you might be biased for the one immediately available because the patience level of consumers has gone down tremendously, right? Consumers are incredibly impatient and they could try to purchase. Social proof, we spoke about this is the word of mouth. If you see a product and it has thousands of references or not citations, ratings, you would believe the product with thousands of ratings more than the one with just a few, right? You would assume that is true, although you don't know who has been rating. Very interesting if you think about it, right? If you ask a friend or family member and they would suggest a product, you would believe them. But likewise, you believe to the same extent thousands and thousands of star ratings of people or bots that you have no clue who they are, including myself, right? Scarcity bias. Booking.com and other web platforms work heavily with this. You go on the site and it always tells you, no matter where you are, no matter where you look for a hotel, there's only 2 rooms available. And billions of people are currently looking at this very hotel. Yeah, sure. But this creates scarcity bias. It creates pressure on the consumer to go to a checkout, right? Careful. This only works if you go through the traditional cycle. If you go through the TikTok GPT cycle, which is new, that bias doesn't work with you anymore because you don't see it. You don't perceive it, right? Actually, most of these mental models will be gone, which is quite interesting. Authority bias and power of the free is, gift giving and whatnot, and using experts as a source. And now I show you something I copied this morning from LinkedIn. It's a guy I actually know. He's a CEO of an IT company here in Switzerland, and he had to get he's a ChatGPT lover. Okay, so he's all like fanatic about ChatGPT, which is great for him. But I use him as an example because it's interesting to see what it did. So he's planning to go on a holiday, and he needs like a travel plug connector, something, right? And so he went to ChatGPT and asked for a suggestion on that. And he got a suggestion, including a link to the web shop on where to buy it. And guess what he did? He bought it. Think of this, the messy middle. What did he do? He cut through the messy middle. It's literally one line from trigger to purchase. He gave all decision-making authority until purchase away to technology. I know it's a small purchase. It's not a high-value item. It's not a car or real estate. Okay, it's a minuscule item in terms of value, but nevertheless, it's an outsourcing of decision-making, evaluation, or exploration authority to technology. This is an insane behavioral change that we haven't had. This is the biggest change on consumer behavior that we've seen for the last 40 years. Right? This is crazy. So please look for examples in your environment. Maybe you see something on LinkedIn. Maybe you see other people do it. Maybe you observe friends. Maybe you have gone through it. Think about this very actively, right? Where do you start to give authority away? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for the perception of brands, for the perception of potential solutions, for the selection, and so on and so forth? To me, crazy, absolutely nuts, right? What else is happening in the consumer journey, particularly in the fuzzy middle? Consumer actions accelerate. And of course, that's visible in my ChatGPT example, right? The guy put in a prompt, within seconds he gets something, and he might go to the checkout. That could have been almost like an instant conversion, right? But we see this instant conversion happening somewhere else. And we see this happening, and we've seen this happening on short video and on live streaming platforms for quite a while. Now I show you an example of China, right? Because if I'm a professor in China, why shouldn't I bring every now and then examples from China? And this is an influencer-driven live stream. So live selling in China is very popular. It's entertaining, to be honest. I watch it every now and then myself. The guy here in the back is an NBA basketball star, and he seems to have a wine, like wine that he sells, right? So he went to China and teamed up with these two influencers. Now let's have a quick look, but don't blink. It's a very short clip, all right?
阿德老师自己的酒，一会儿跟可可签名。好，没有了。Stop。No way, no way， 没有问题。
Completely sold out. All of them.
Oh my god！
That was the live recording of that live stream, that live sales activity. What you just saw. And what you saw and witnessed was how 10,000 wine bottles were sold in less than 10 seconds. Come on, it's crazy, right? This is insane. I mean, it's absolutely insanity. What do we see here? A, Chinese like wine, right? So if you have wine to sell, you know where to go and sell it. Because there's a lot of Chinese, make them buy your wine. You'll be filthy rich. Make sure that you remember me, right? What else do you remember? You couldn't have gone through a purchasing process in less than 10 seconds as a consumer to buy 10,000 bottles of wine. This is instant conversion. This is pure impulse purchase, right? This is actually crazy. So the consumers, many consumers have been driven towards impulse type behaviors over the last couple of years through short video, through live stream sales. This is behavioral change that happened below the first surface. Most people don't pay attention to this, but you do because you've just seen it. And I show you the data behind it, all right? When we talk about video and sort of like fast consumption, the platform that we have to talk about, of course, is TikTok, right? Video consumption is now sort of like the traffic pusher, if you want, online. And it converts really well because it uses literally all of the mental biases we've seen before on the consumer. It's time-based, it's scarcity-based, right? It's fear of missing out based, it's authority-based because the authority would be the influencer with thousands and thousands of followers. This is your expert in this moment, right? Absolutely nuts and crazy. And this has accelerated how products are being sold, both in basket size as well as category. I've seen cars being sold on a live stream in China. Cars are high value items, right? For a car, you go through a lengthy decision-making process, but you can't in a live stream. That's got to be like this. And I've seen it, right? So it changes behavior on scale in different categories, in different purchasing situations. And we have to acknowledge this and look sort of like underneath the hood to understand really what's going on. And of course, the penetration of short video to a lot of, or to a widespread demographic makes this a very lethal combination, a great one for brands, but a lethal one from a psychology perspective and or behavioral perspective, right? And if you look at the share of mobile on mobile share on traffic, we get sort of like the notion, of course, mobile share on traffic is increasing, and it's mostly increasing through video-based apps. It shouldn't be a surprise, of course, right? Because video-based apps, they drive traffic or data volume, if you want. But the drive of data volume through these video platforms has given rise to impulse purchasing, as I just mentioned. Now, here are two illustrations. On the left, it's consumer impulse buying by category. And you see, of course, clothing, food, and household items, shoes, are sort of like the leading categories, right, in impulse. On the right, pay attention to 2020 to 2024, 2025. You see the increase from about $20 outside at 2020 to 25 to 28. This is due to the increase of short video impact on impulse behavior. This exactly correlates with the growth of TikTok, of YouTube Shorts, of Instagram Reels, of the implementation of their shopping systems, and so far and so forth. Right? This is the change that's again below the hood. Most people don't pay any attention, but to us, it should be really interesting as marketers, right? Actually, as politicians, should be interesting. As regulators, it should be interesting, because where does it lead the consumer? Right? If consumers outsource authority to either time or technology, move faster through the purchasing process, maybe there's more rational spending that leads to a decrease in satisfaction overall, right? It may be not healthy for society. So there's many applications on this very graph. I think it's fascinating, right? Then what else do we see happening with the consumer? We see omnichannel behavior. And we discussed this before with the travel agency. Consumers are not going anymore through a linear path, right? They look on a mobile, then while they look on a mobile, they walk through a shopping mall, they see other information, and they jump back and forth between different channels. And while doing so, they expect the same experience. They actually expect a seamless experience from channel to channel to channel to channel. So in other words, if you go and buy a coffee, and that's why I have Starbucks here, Starbucks is actually a good example of a sort of like seamless implementation. If you go to the store, if you buy the coffee on your mobile,